My name is Jen Lanahan and I'm the Learning and Diversity Manager here at G&T. And on behalf of the firm, we're very pleased to welcome you here today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to their elders past and present. We're very pleased to welcome Lucy Darhill here today. Lucy is a youth mentor, an advocate, mental health educator, and radio host, which is a wonderful mix of things. And she's here to speak to us about navigating the world of parenting teenagers. Now, I am entirely convinced that my dad had a really easy ride of it. He had 2 daughters, and I think we were pretty perfect. However, I think I'm about to find out that there was a lot of things going on in the background that I wasn't aware of. Here at G&T, we have absolutely loved being part of the Swedish Dads initiatives, and this is actually the last session. So I'm sure Lucy is going to really kick it. What's the opposite of kicking something off? Wrap it off with a bang. There we go. So thank you, Lucy, if you'd like to join us.
I'll just test my mic. You can all hear me. Excellent. Thank you very much for having me here today, because I'm passionate about teenagers. It was the biggest education I ever had, or I'm continuing to have. It's probably the most humbled I've ever been. When my eldest first became a teenager, I all of a sudden, as much as I thought I knew what I was doing, I realised I knew absolutely nothing. I'm going to skip, so you don't need to see a picture of me since I'm here. I guess it is relevant for me to give you a bit of background, though. So I have 3 teenagers. My youngest is now 15. They are very different people, and I parent them very differently as a result. I'm also I've been a youth worker working with medium to high-risk young people. So these are people who really have struggled in life and in their home. They might have got in trouble with the police. They might be struggling with homelessness, with drugs and alcohol, with mental health, just with trouble with their parents. In the teenage world, things, as you may know, can go from absolutely fine to catastrophic within seconds. And also you can be getting on just fine when they go to bed, and in the morning you are just not, what you have done, just, just don't even talk to me. And it's horrible because you're sitting there going, what just happened? I just went to bed, I woke up, and now you're not talking to me? Yes. Very familiar, nods around the room. Well, that is parenting teenagers, and it can be very demoralizing as an adult when you think that you actually are quite a responsible person in the world, and you know what you're doing, and you've managed to get a job and keep a job, and yet this teenager can absolutely floor you and make you feel like you really know nothing. I do a community radio program, and I did it originally to give young people a voice, because I think that young people actually have a lot to say. And I think part of the problem that we have in parenting is that they don't feel like they can express themselves enough. So I wanted to give them a platform. What I found was that they were a little bit nervous to say everything that they wanted to say, but were quite happy for me to say it on their behalf. So what ended up happening is that now I will interview people, and I will have discussions, and I'll do research about things that matter to them, things that they look at life and they don't understand. One of the things that I think for us also I have just completed a master's in public health with a main focus on adolescent mental health, and what are the patterns of behavior, what are the coping mechanisms that teenagers take on that basically lead to lifestyle illnesses later in life. Now, we have an obesity problem that was 1 in 10, now it's 6 in 10. It's a huge problem. So food as a coping mechanism is one of the issues. Smoking, alcohol, excessive or poor use of sports, overwork, are all factors that lead to major problems later in life, and they start in adolescence. So I've done a lot of research on it, and will actually take that research into a PhD. But what I want to share with you today is just how important you are. As much as your teenager will tell you that you are not important, you are absolutely fundamentally important in their lives. And I want to give you, if you walk away with nothing today, I want you to walk away knowing that whatever you're getting back, if you can be solid and meet them for who they are, remembering the little divine thing that just couldn't wait for you to come home, that's the relationship you need to hold on to, regardless of what is coming at you. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why some of those things are coming at you. So hormones. Oh my goodness. They are getting more hormones raging around their body now than ever at any other time in their lives. Their brain is developing in a way that it hasn't since they were first born. So if you can imagine everything, like when a baby's born, we celebrate them, don't we? They poo, they pee, they usually vomit on us, and yet we still love them. So a teenager is probably verbally pooing, peeing and vomiting over you, and we hold it against them. I mean, like, they're kind of going, well, what's with that? You were fine with me 20 years ago, or no, sorry, 10 years ago. All of a sudden it's a big problem. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a similar stage. You know, there's a massive growth in their brain. They actually don't know what the hell is going on. They go to bed and they feel one thing. They wake up and they've had a whole reshift inside. So because they grow from the outside in, when they go to pick up the glass where they thought it was the night before, they might knock it over. And that's because their arms have grown longer in the night and their brain hasn't quite got that distance yet. And yet we sit there and go, Tom, seriously? It's like all over the kitchen table. Everyone's had to jump up. Probably most people have had to change. If you've had your work while you're eating your breakfast, then that's all got to be changed. You know, it's the clumsiness is actually all part of their growing, and yet they're held accountable for something that is, that actually is not their fault. They are programmed biologically to not need us anymore. So if we go back and think about, when we have to go back, maybe even to other cultures. Now is slightly easier to picture that. Young women, young men were getting married in their 16, 17, 18 years old. That's partly biological, that in some cultures that is still happening, but partly it's a biological thing, that the moment they are fertile, they are programmed to go out there and procreate. It needs them to be independent. They need to let go of us as their home. So when we desperately don't want them to, they have this battle that, again, they can't understand where the battle's coming from. But as adults and as parents, we need to understand where the battle's coming from. Does that make sense? Yep. Concentration. Oh, 3 teenagers. I know. Can they get to the end of a sentence without, getting bored or going to their phone or just basically turning the TV on or the channel over or the volume up? It's insulting, it really is. However, again, what's going on in their brain is going so fast that they don't realize they're getting bored when they're bored, until they see the look on your face that is completely insulted. Faces is something else I probably need to warn you about. They can't, the part of their brain that is developing the quickest is the back of their brain, the amygdala. And that's where our spontaneous responses come from. Jumping off that bridge looks really cool, I'm just going to do it. The front part of the brain, which is the last part of a teenage brain to develop, says, yeah, but actually, have you checked how deep the water is? Have you checked the boat isn't coming along? Have you checked there's no one there? The reasoning part of the brain, the sensible part, the part that we all really like, no, it's not ticking over. It's just not there. And you're going to have some teenagers where, because of the conversations you've had with them, that it's going to be a little bit more developed. If they have been sucked into this digital world that we're getting right now, it's going to be underdeveloped. If they have had alcohol early, underdeveloped. Drugs early, underdeveloped, and potentially substantially underdeveloped for a very long time. The drugs that are around at the moment, this is a slight rabbit hole, I'll try not to go down too much, but the drugs that are around at the moment, they make the back part of the brain fire up quicker than the front, which means that they are more likely to take risks. They're less likely to think things through. And when people say that marijuana is a lighter version of all the drugs that are around, what that basically does is it really dulls the development of the prefrontal cortex, which means that you might notice they're very lethargic. They tend to be very lethargic adults, and that comes from that part of the brain really just not developing because you've dulled it early on. Your priorities get all wrong as far as an adult is concerned, but as far as a teenager is concerned, they got the priorities right. Their friends are way more important than we are anymore. And again, that's quite painful for a parent who's, either potentially working 2 jobs to keep their kids in the schools that they want to keep them in. They're working all hours. They might have, I don't know how much cleaning or tidying up you do after your teenagers. I've certainly done a fair amount of that myself. But their priority to get themselves ready to go out on a social occasion weighs far more than actually tidying their room like I've asked them to do before they go out. Go figure. Their priorities, my priorities are very, very different. So the common challenges, and again, I'll leave plenty of time at the end if you want to ask me questions, but the common challenges that I see with the young people that I work with would predominantly sit on this list. I haven't put mental health on here. Mental health is a massive issue at the moment. And I will, the next 2 slides, I've kept the slides really short, will explain what I feel would be helpful and what I've seen as helpful with the young people that we work with when it's coming to mental health, because it's a massive issue around this age. The things that most parents ask me about is the lack of communication and how to deal with that. How do you get your teenager, mostly boys, and I'm sorry because I know we're working with dads predominantly here, but there is a grunting phase that comes along. However, the grunting phase is part of the brain growth and brain redevelopment, and if we can, I have a 15-year-old, and he did the grunting. I'll say, how you going? Now. Is, I don't know. All right? But you just got to learn the language. All right? This is what I got with. So I got him to say it again until I learned, and I said it again. No, you need to say it slower. And I just played a game with him. I knew that part of it was him trying to control, me and make me give up. Well, I wasn't going to go there because I'm a bit difficult like that. And I said that actually I wanted to know what he had to say because clearly it was valuable and clearly I needed to learn. So we have this game now. Now, my husband gets slightly more irritated about it than me, and he won't go back. I can have a 30-second conversation without saying any words with my son, and it will take him out of whatever mood he's in. Now, I know I'm pandering slightly to that behavior, but I get him to laugh. And I get him to see that I'm not judging him for being slightly irritating by just not wanting to speak. And I try and teach him that if he doesn't value his voice and he doesn't share with me what's mattering to him, then how can I help him? How can I be part of the things that are irritating him? So I'm teaching him as early as I can that he needs to be part of his own solution. What I have noticed with the boys who are in our service, and I work for an organisation called Street Work, which if anyone wants information on it, I can leave flyers for them, is that one of the biggest things that the boys say to me when I do the intake with them is that they find people mock them for their lack of communication, and that makes them want to communicate even less. And I think as adults, this is really powerful information for us to know. Sarcasm is part of the Australian culture. It's part of our human, it's what we do. We think it's funny. But it absolutely cuts teenagers to the core because they have a radar for judgment. And they're dealing with it with their friends all the time. So if parents cannot take the mickey out of their kids, it really helps. Top tip, that one. Oh, we're only on lack of communication. Sorry. Okay. Alcohol. All right, let's go back to the hormones because this is really helpful. No, I won't go back to the hormones. I'll go back to the neurons. Basically, in the brain, when the brain is doing this massive learning, an explosion at this time of their lives, there are some neurons called mirroring neurons. I can only say that a couple of times because there are a lot of R's in that word. But basically what they're doing is they are watching and they're learning by what they're watching. This is very dangerous when it comes to this in the Australian culture. Really dangerous. Because they actually don't see that we can go and have an amazing party without alcohol. Now, alcohol in a teenage brain kills the brain cells that are trying really hard to work and grow. These ones that we want them to think things through. These are the ones we want them to make a decision when they go to a party about whether they're going to have some of that drink that someone could have spiked. Whether to get in a car with their mate who they think is the coolest dude ever, who's just passed his driving test, but you've also seen him have a drink. Just one, but he's had a drink. Those are life-changing decisions. So we want them to see that it's cool to not drink at a party, that when you're driving, you don't have anything. And we can say it all we like. They don't listen to our words, they watch us. And they watch us like hawks. So I want you to remember that the mirroring neurons and what we do is worth so much more than what we say. That's really important. It's not saying never drink alcohol at all. It isn't saying that at all. What it's saying is know that you're being watched when you do, and how you socialize around alcohol, and how you socialize, and how you relax when you get home from work, how you deal with an argument, how you deal with being stressed. It's all being watched. So I know here you have an amazing program for health and well-being and, how to deal with stress. Use it. It's really, it will set them up to lay good patterns for later on. And just a little something to go with that. I talk at schools in year 5 and 6, and then I'll go into high school and do all the way through. But in year 5 and 6, I do a bit of market research because I want to know what they see, because they're preteens at that age. And I need to understand what happens and why by year 7 and 8 they're interested in alcohol, or they're the social media side. But this is the alcohol question. And I ask them, these are classes of about, when you put them all together, about 250 in a year. I ask them, how many of you go to a party, one of your parents' parties, where there's no alcohol at all? One person put their hand up, 250 kids. In another school, we were asking about weddings, and no one put their hand up. I mean, we laugh about it, and it's funny. But when I say to them, can you go to a birthday party without drinking anything? They're going, yeah. And I said, well, do you dance on the table like me? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, do you need anything to help you do that? And they go, no. I go, okay, so what happens? Add 5, 10 years, like why do we suddenly need alcohol to go and chat with our mates or dance on a table or dance like crazy? And they can't figure it out. But it does happen, and it happens within 2 years. So I'm fascinated, what is it? What are we not doing? How are we not giving them the power to be able to do that? The drugs is a really similar situation now. There aren't many of the kids that I talk to who have drugs as part of their world. In my service, yes. Not so much in the schools, and it's not something that's divulged in the schools. But again, it's a coping mechanism, and something like marijuana is more acceptable than some of the other drugs that they're taking. But what we're finding is the peer pressure to experiment and try is coming down much lower in the classroom, in the age spectrum than we expected it to. So now around 15, 16, that's when they're starting to think they might give it a go. That's young, right? Like 16 years old, that's year 9, year 8, 9, 10. The risk-taking behaviour is very much to do with the brain. And you get some kids who take risks all the time, and they're kind of, them from little, they're risk takers, they'll just give it a go. And then you've got others who are very risk averse. Now, risk taking is important. We need to teach them to take risks, because otherwise they'll never go to a football camp, they'll never go for a job interview, they'll never go and meet new people. And can I say that when you've got the online world where actually you can quite happily game for 3-4 hours a day, that's a major problem if they actually if they are also risk averse, because they're going to stay even more introverted. Make sense? I mean, I suspect a fair few people in here have got questions about the online world and how to deal with that with teenagers at the moment. Porn is a huge one. I talk in a lot of schools about porn because it is something that, according to the most recent research, is happening to our young boys at around 10 years old. That's when they're first starting to see it. A bit scary, 10 years old. When I tell that to the girls, they're a bit horrified because their mates are, in the playground, and then, you can't be doing that. But on average, that's the age. What does that matter? Is it all something that they all go through? Well, actually, it does matter, because it warps their picture of a relationship. It warps, I talk to them that, a lot, they have to go through quite a lot to actually be able to do what they're doing in that. And that's not normal. So when girls get asked to do things, or when boys get asked to do things that they actually don't want to do, and some of the boys will say, so I'm actually going to say it's the boys who are watching and the girls who are being asked. That is not, on the whole, it's just the majority, okay? So it does actually go the other way, but the majority is boys asking girls to do things that they actually either don't want to do or are not ready to do. I say to the girls, say no. Like, we have to talk about this with our teenagers, because they're going to be asked. Of this room, at least a quarter will be being asked this by the time they're 14 years old, to send a picture of themselves naked. Now, that is a criminal offence. Child porn, they're actually prosecuting a lot of people now for producing child porn and for distributing child porn. So when I go into schools, I explain to them that if you take a photograph of yourself, even if you think the boy or the girl really likes you, the moment you take that picture and send it, you are producing child porn. The police, I work a lot with the police. The police try really hard to help teenagers, but by the 3rd or 4th time, they're going to be on a register. Now, that's huge. It's really sad. And as much as they want to experiment, and there are a lot of youth organisations that are trying to get the law changed so that young people can experiment, not a world we have, but it is a world that they've got. How do we support them to discover their sexuality without putting themselves at risk like that? And it is a massive risk. So when I say what are you creating, I used to do a lot about choices and consequences. Every young person I work with, I talk about being the change they want to see in the world. It's too easy to blame the parents, and it's too easy for us to be blamed as parents. But we've also got to say, what world are we creating for them? Because I'll always talk to them about what world they're creating for themselves. But what world are we creating? What world can we create for our teenagers that actually means that the choices that are available within that environment are ones that are going to support them? That's a great opportunity as a parent. So what have you got in your home? What have you got? What sort of things do you have around you? When we have, obviously I've done the mirroring neurons, that mirroring reflection. Remember that what they see is what they're going to do. So if you say to them, don't swear, and you swear, they'll swear. And it's quite funny because we had a policy of no swearing in our house. I'm sorry, I'm going to throw you under the bus again. We had a policy of no swearing in our house. And then our 2-year-old came back and said, I'm a little bugger, I'm a little bugger. And that's because, you know, he was at times being a little bugger. And that's what he was, you know, we were saying that to him. But then when it comes back out of a 2-year-old's mouth, you kind of go, oh, that's a bit rude. It's a bit rude, it's a bit nasty, you know, like you just don't realize. But when my daughter came back and used language that I would not use in our house, and I certainly would not let another adult use to me, I said no. We have a standard of what is acceptable and what is not, and you have to hold that. I equally have to have an appreciation that she's got a way of communicating with her teenagers in her life that is different to how she may communicate with me. But in our house and in our home, that is unacceptable. And my husband and I were completely agreed on that. And I would say, be agreed. Make sure you set the standard and that you both stand by that standard. It's really important. If you are prone to getting a little bit hot-headed and perhaps swearing yourself, maybe introduce just that bit where you go, my bad. You're quite right. I should have found a different way of saying it. You know, being humble, being real, teaches them that they can be humble and real. Again, great reflection for them to see that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to fail. It's okay to stuff up. You know, we all do it. Heavens, best learnings come from that. And if you think of that in business, what skills are you teaching them to then take into the workplace? You know, honesty and responsibility. If there's one thing that the teenagers, and again, don't forget, when I'm working in my work, I'm working with teenagers who've gone quite wrong in terms of their path and what as parents their parents wanted for them. Their choices have meant that they are, you know, addicted to either drugs, alcohol, there's suicide, there's self-harm, a whole load of catastrophes really, compared to the beauty and the love and the joy and the celebration that we want to have with them. We always have to come back to the responsibility that we can be that change, but it does take honesty. Now, what I have found with them is that they have stopped trusting their own voice. And I tracked back, like, where is that lack of trust in their own voice and their own decision making coming from? And what I found was that very often they'd say, for example, two parents are arguing. They'll be able to feel that there's a problem. They'll be able to feel that someone's upset. And they'll say, are you okay? And mum will go, yeah, I'm fine. Or dad will go, yeah, fine, whatever, and move off. But they're saying, I'm fine. And the kid's going, okay, well, your voice is telling me you're not fine. Your movements are telling me you're not fine. Your look is telling me you're not fine. The way you're looking at me is telling me you're not fine. So they get mixed messages. And what they do is they start doubting their own internal radar of what they're feeling. And that feeling is what actually is going to keep them safe in every situation in life. If you think around, we talk about stranger danger. How do you know if someone you don't know is worrying or not? By what you're feeling. So I have to reteach my young people how to trust their own internal radar. And I will say to them, if I say something to you and you don't think that what I'm saying is what I mean, you need to tell me, and then we'll talk about it. Because I may not be aware that I'm not telling you the truth. And as a parent, that was incredibly challenging, but it was worth it. Because now I have an 18-year-old, last day of school today, very exciting moment. She has made decisions that I just take my hat off to. Like, I'm so incredibly proud of her. And she has learned to tell us when we're not being honest. Now, again, confronting, but we have a clearer benchmark of where she is and where we are. So again, you've got to try and see what works in your family. You can't suddenly change everything. You're going to have to work at it with yourself first and then introduce it in the home, but really well worth doing. Cuddles and connection. Oh no, coming home and being home. How could I forget that one? Okay, how many people in the room still have their work phone on after they get home from work? If none of you put your hand up, thank you. I was going to say, like, I would have been a bit shocked there. Thank you. It's true, isn't it? It's hard to turn your own device off. Practice what you preach. If you want connection with your child and your teenager, turn yours off. You can guarantee they are going to be available when you're not. And they are going to be available when you're not. And it sucks just as you're about to answer an email when they go, can I have a conversation with you? But the thing that they learned from little, don't interrupt mommy, don't interrupt daddy. And yet they can't tell you when they're going to have their crisis and when they're going to be ready to talk. But if you can drop everything and be ready when they are, and then say, can you give me 2 minutes and I will be there? Time yourself and be there, because otherwise you will lose that trust and you will lose that opportunity. You will build trust with them. You'll build a connection with them. But you've got to kind of make that choice within yourself to respect that if you say you're going to do something, you have to do it, because they've probably spent 14 years not trusting you because you've said you're going to and you don't. With the best intentions in the world, you get distracted. All right? Cuddles and connection. This is probably most noticeable with girls, but equally with boys. Just because their bodies are getting bigger, it doesn't mean they don't want to cuddle. And they don't want to have that connection with you. But how many of us, kind of go in for a cuddle and you just get, no, I don't think so. Like it's, they either want it or they don't want it, and you can't quite judge which one is which. My 15-year-old still wants a cuddle. Mainly because I actually have said, I can see that he wants a cuddle. It's just not cool. So I wait until it is cool and I'm right in there. I'm ready. I'm giving him a cuddle. And I love the fact that in our family, cuddles are non-negotiable to a point. The 18-year-old doesn't really like to be cuddled very much. So sometimes it stacks on Rosie and she gets a cuddle by everybody in the family and she's screaming underneath it and, but she's loving it equally. Like you've got to respect them, but at the same time, remember to keep that connection going. And I'll tell you why. It's really important. For a girl, the relationship they have with their father and the connection they have with their father is how they will benchmark the relationship with any man they date, any boy they date. If they're not used to getting conversation from their father, they won't bother waiting for conversation from a partner. So when a partner comes up and says, hey, want to hook up? They go, yeah, why not? Let's just go for it, right? A girl who has a good relationship with their dad and lots of chatting and asking how you're going will say, hey, do you want to know my name first? Would you like to know, anything more about me? They might even say, thanks, but no thanks, and walk away. That's what we want them to do. We want them to value themselves enough that when they get into that dating scene, someone wants to know a little bit more about them before they actually want to hook up. But a lot of the party scene, it's literally, hey, you want to hook up? That's it. That's the sum total of what they get. And if you don't have a good sense of your self-worth, you're going to say yes. And you're going to judge your self-esteem by how many hookups you got that night. And the boys are going to do the same. Because, you know, like, wow, it's really cool if I got 3 girls that night. That's pretty cool. But it's your benchmark of decency and respect in a relationship. How much do you talk? And that's where I'm saying that grunting teenager, persist. Because what will happen with him is he will learn how to talk to girls. He'll learn how to talk to other adults. He'll learn that sometimes, even though he doesn't want to talk, he's got something valuable to say. Tell me, I want to hear. Like, I value your opinion here. Tease it out. Cuddles and connection, please keep having them. But, you know, again, within a young person's safety space, their safety circle is really important to respect. Never, ever ask them to cuddle someone they're not happy cuddling. You know, there may well be a reason for it that you don't understand. And just let them lead the way, but say, oh, I really miss those cuddles with you. And if you're sitting watching television, hey, fancy a cuddle on the sofa? You know, just snuggle up, get a blanket. Make it special, because however big the body gets, there's a little person inside there. Communication. Verbal and non-verbal. Do you remember me saying about, you know, where they see what they get what you're saying as opposed to what you're doing? You know, you will be, they can tell by a look. In fact, they can't tell by a look. Let's just be honest here. Okay, basically, what happens in the brain as it's growing is that it misunderstands what your face is saying. Like, it misreads what you're saying. So you could look really concerned. They will see anger. There's a fantastic book called Blame My Brain. Awesome book. All about the brain and how it works. And they've got loads of pictures of eyes. And you've got to try and read the emotion in the eyes. It's fantastic. I got so many of them wrong. But teenagers get even more wrong. You know, I at least was in the adult getting them wrong bracket. Teenagers were, you know, they miss so many. So what if they misread us when we're caring and when we're worried, that they misread us as being angry or dismissive or judgmental? Those are all things that make them turn off and not listen. So we need to know that. That's really valuable for us, because we've got to vocalize what we want to say. We need to vocalize, hey, I was really worried about you. Now, you may be cool, you may be saying I'm angry, but actually I'm really worried. And it's good that I'm worried, because that means I care. So if you can tell me where you're going in future, then at least I know if I get a phone call like that at 2 o'clock in the morning or at 10 o'clock at night and I'm expecting you to be there and you're there, that's important, you know, and explain to them why. The decency, I think I've mentioned, you know, what's your level of decency? This is a domestic violence situation that we've got with our young people growing up. They need to know what decency and what respect is. They need to know it at home. They need to know it at their workplaces. They need to know it in their relationships. Girls need to know how to speak to boys. Boys need to know how to speak to girls. Like, it starts here, and it's incredibly empowering. The timing. Again, I can talk about this from a gaming point of view. Dinner's ready. Oh, Mom, I've just started a game. Or, you know, Pat, we need to talk about this. Oh, but, like, you know, it was right in the middle of FIFA. You know, how could I not know that game's going to take another 12 minutes? Like, well, I don't play it, so how would I know? But if I sit down and have a conversation with him and say, okay, when I want to have a conversation, and it's a conversation we need to have, how do I know when you've just started a game and when you haven't? So how do we have this conversation? And he and I will work out what the code is. You know, I'll say 5 minutes, and he'll look at me and just go, see if, you know, if he can have 10. But if he's later than that 10, the Xbox is gone. And we've had to follow through with that in our house. And have the withdrawal symptoms from that, but it was worth it. Does that make sense? You need to be careful of your timing, but stand by your timing and have consequences. Please don't say that they can't go out for a week because you'll never be able to hold them to that one. But, you know, a consequence that lasts a week that you could follow through, do it. You know, you'll get an amazing, if they don't have something for a week that they're addicted to, you just have to be prepared to deal with the fallout and the withdrawal symptoms, because it is an addiction like any other addiction. Proportional representation. See, that's in gold and bold and big. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them in that denominator. You know, like in 2 ears, listen more than go. It's really important, because it's in the silence that you are going to see that they will start talking. I'm the worst. I can talk and I can think I can understand what they're saying, and I'll say, oh, is it this or this? No. And what I've learned over the years that I've then been working with some of the kids who are a bit more angry than mine is that if I'm quiet and I listen, and then I just check that I've understood, and then I listen again, I will get a whole load of information that I didn't expect. A whole load. And it's gold. And then I'm understanding where they're coming at a situation from. So when you've got a conflict with your child, your teenager, because they're not children anymore, they're teenagers, when you've got a conflict, if you can listen to them and just tease it out of them, and there's sometimes you're going to be told things that just horrify you. They're, things that they've done or places they've gone that you didn't know. The moment they know you're shocked and horrified by that, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to be so proud of themselves because they've made you shocked and they just think that's the coolest thing ever. Or otherwise, they're going to feel like they've let you down. And you may think that's really good, and in a way it is, but with all the adults that I have spoken to with the research for my master's, the thing that cut them the deepest as adults and the pain that they carry most was disappointing their parents. Like, how much power do we hold that lasts lifetimes? Like, big, big power. Now, we can abuse it, or we can actually we can value it and respect it. How much time have I got left? 15 minutes, perfect, thank you. So why are you important? You're amazing. You are incredibly important. You're incredibly valuable. And I'm really hoping that you ask some questions, because I'm really hoping I haven't depressed you all, which is the potential when you talk about things like this. But hey, you're caring. Like, you bring, and I'm going to talk about the guys here, all right? Because I think as women, we know what we bring in a home. And then I'm going to talk about parenting as a working parent, because I think that's a whole different kettle of fish. But as a dad, you bring caring energy into that home because they feel safe with you. And you must not undervalue that. It's not about being the provider. That's not what and I've done my research with my teenagers, so I talk about, I probably can represent quite a few here as a snapshot. The things that they say they find dads bring the most is the caring aspect, fun, that they want to have fun with their dad, and sometimes when dad comes home and he's had a really busy week, they miss that fun. And yet when dad's on holiday, he's fun again. So find a way to still, with teenagers, be fun. And that might mean that you look a little less cool, but that's okay. Because when they're much older, they will look back and think you were very cool, even though at the time they thought you were the, naffest dad ever. Loving. We fundamentally cannot live without love. It's the thing that makes people melt. It makes people connect with each other. It gets rid of arguments. Love is incredibly important, and I mention it in every school talk that I go to, and you feel the room go like that. They know that they want love out of a relationship. They know that they want love with their parents. They know that they're difficult, but actually what they're looking for is not to be judged, but to be loved, regardless of their behavior. Their behavior is unacceptable, but I still love you. It's important that you know that. But that behavior is unacceptable, and we're going to have to find a way to deal with that. Champion them. When your child, it may not, none of your children may be in this position, but when your child does something that that is going to get them into trouble, you may have to go in to talk to at school, or you may have to go and represent them at the police station, God forbid, or a whole load of other things. Champion them. Talk about them for who they are, not what they do. I don't, to be honest with you, the captain of the cricket team, with the moment he's not captain of the cricket team, is not as loved as he was when he is the captain of the cricket team. They don't care about that deep down inside. They care about being captain because you care about them being captain. But for them, they actually want you to love them for who they are, even if they were not captain, or great at science, or top of the maths group. And sometimes being bottom of the maths group gets them a bit more attention, and therefore they'll stay there while they're getting that attention from you. So it's kind of worth knowing they want you to champion them for who they are, and say that's from a toddler. I would say right from little, champion them for who they are, not what they do. They're always looking for your approval. Be very careful how you give it, because it might be a lifelong search then for everybody else's approval. Again, champion them for who they are, love them for who they are, tell them that that's what's important to you. And role model. I've probably gone on enough about the role modeling, but they are, walk your talk, but talk your walk. Does that make sense? You need to be able to flip that either way and be the change that you want to see in them, because it absolutely does work. It really does. Not all families look that happy, and that's also okay. I saw that picture at the end. But it can be. I mean, I've had the best time parenting my teenagers. The first few years were really tough with my first one. And then I stopped trying to fix her and started listening, and they've been amazing. So, does anyone have any questions? Because we might be able to kind of build on any of that and expand any of it. Any questions? Have I been amazing? I must have been amazing if there are no questions. Yeah.
I'm actually, because I have a teenager, but he's 11 and I think he's becoming a teenager. I mean,
yeah.
How do you work out what stage they're at? And certainly the whole, I don't know, very much resonated with me.
Yeah.
And, I'll just sit there, just like, I'll talk, listen to him, but the
yeah.
I don't knows don't change to anything else.
Yeah. So, two questions there. So one, what age does it kick in? Younger and younger at the moment. Younger and younger, you've got to feel what age they're at. So when they start to rebel slightly, it might be that they want a later bedtime. And it might be as simple as saying, hey, I can see that you're growing up, and if you can, keep going with that level of responsibility, then maybe you can have an extra half an hour. But you need to make sure you're ready for school in the morning. So how can we balance that? So you bring them into the decision making, and then gauge where their development's at, and so how much responsibility they can have. Because ultimately, you want them to get themselves ready for school in the morning. Because if you have to leave for work early, you need to know that they can get themselves off to school. And that does happen when you're parenting teens. Very often two parents are at school, at work. What does he enjoy?
Oh, he loves his sport, he loves his soccer, he loves his mates.
So when you sit, do you sit and watch the soccer on together?
Yep.
Can you talk about that?
Probably.
Yeah. Do your homework. I honestly, I know about FIFA football now. I even said, can I play it? He got me off that pretty quickly because apparently I was no good. But, I sat down and lived his world for a little bit. Found out what was important, and that way you can have a conversation about what he wants, and then throw in the odd conversation about what you want. It makes such a difference, because they think you're not on the take all the time. And sport's easy finding other things for them to be interested in is really important as well. But just getting into their world, and I know that in our house there's much discussion about, you know, what happened in the Premier League and who's, you know, what's happening with the transfer market, and there will be different conversations with different people in the house. But if you can keep that conversation going, it really helps, because then when they need you, they will know that they might start off talking about football, but then they can say, hey, look, Dad, you know, I've got this situation going on at school and I just love your take on it. That helps. Yeah? Yeah.
The question, so in terms of the relationships between the parent and the child, understand where you're coming from that. In terms of managing the relationships amongst the siblings themselves, so
Yeah.
because obviously the eldest child, I find, is more influenced by us as
Yep.
parents, but we find the young children heavily influenced by the teenager
Yes.
in terms of their relationships and role models and
Mirroring.
behaviours and everything else with it. So how do you actively manage that, I guess, in a constructive way without micromanaging
Yep.
relationships and interfering with their own?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example and then I'll be specific if that's okay. So when I do year sixes in school, which is obviously just before high school, I get them to put their circle of, I say, who are your influences? Whose opinion do you value most? And still by then, the parents are number one. In year 5, it's always the parents who are number one. And then they have their siblings, and then they have their teacher. In fact, their teacher might be above the sibling, but either one that way. Then it's their friends, and then it's strangers. They have the strangers on there because, you know, I don't know, some neighbour, I think it was, and I said, well, could we call them a stranger? When I asked about if any of them had older siblings, and I said, can you come and show me what happens to that lineup, you know, say maybe when you're about 15 or 16, the sibling usurped the parents, and the boyfriend or girlfriend came next, the friends were really close, and the stranger came right up. And that's, of course, you know, social media and not so much total strangers, but when you think about how many strangers they talk to, it's surprising. But the siblings became important. And the siblings goes one or two ways, but how you treat the first sibling, the second sibling will be watching to then benchmark what they can do. So very often the first one will be quite well behaved, the eldest child will be quite well behaved, and the second one will push the boundary even more. What you have to watch out for is with the first one is that when they're really good, they can just be waiting to go really off the other end because they're so fed up of being the good one. So what I struggled with when you've got two siblings is that you had your good child and you had your bad child or your rebellious child. It's how not to play them off against each other. So one of the things that I would say first of all is when you're talking about any one of them, be very careful what you're saying and what you're saying in front of any of the others, because they will hold it against you and they will hold it against them. They'll use it as a power. If the elder one is slightly rebellious, perhaps the elder one, and I don't know your situation, maybe is going out and partying and the younger one can't wait to do it, talk about what the consequences are for the older one and their partying. So I'll go back to my 15-year-old because it's easier to have a practical example that I don't mind sharing. He's got a lot of his friends who are starting to be interested in drinking and going to parties and hanging out with girls. My son has no real interest at the moment because he's got 2 older sisters. But what we do is we sit and talk about what the consequences of that are. You know, why are they doing it? I wonder why. We talk about his older sisters and we say, well, why do you think they've done that? And what do you think the consequences were? Start having those conversations, but all together. So you talk about their friends. You know, have you noticed anyone's so you make it less personal about those two and start helping them be buddies together. Because what's going to happen is where they may not listen to you, they will always go and get you know, like if they need help, you want them to go to that older sibling for help. And actually the older one may go to the younger one for help. Does that make sense? When something goes horribly wrong, very often they'll go there and then it's the other one that will come to you. So you just have to keep saying to them, look, I want you two to be each other's best buddies. You may not get on right now. You may really like hate each other, which is a horrible word to use, but siblings sometimes do feel that passionately. But you're equally very important. So you just start that conversation about the importance of looking after each other. Imagine if it was your best friend, what would you want for them? Make sense? No? Anyone else?
About social media.
Yes. Social media. One of the schools that I talk at have a massive problem with social media, and a lot of them are under 14. And for Instagram, they're supposed to be 14 or over. It's actually illegal to be under 14. Parents are the key factor in that, not the school. Their friends are going to make them want to be on there. But the key thing is that actually not everyone's friends are on it. So much as they say, all my friends are on it, so I need to be on it, they're actually not. It's like when they have the conversation about who's hooked up and who's having sex. Sorry about that. But very often they say they are, but they haven't. It's just like... But social media, I mean, phones are slightly different because the moment they've got a phone, it's their way of socializing and connecting and communicating. And actually it becomes part of, and this is dramatic, but can I just say it's teenage speak, it's life and death. You take a teenager's phone away from them and they are armless. They are completely lost. They don't know what to do. So when you introduce it, it's finding the right time and actually setting the boundaries. We didn't monitor our children's social media. I don't know if that's right or wrong. There's a really great woman called the Cyber Safety Lady. She's got a fantastic website. She's got a great book. She teaches you how to block, monitor everything. Go to her for that. I teach personal responsibility. I say, I'm not going to be around all the time, but you are going to be using that all the time. So there are some things that are non-negotiable. You have to be decent on there. If whatever you say on there, you need to be able to stand beside. If I find you've got an anonymous account, you're off. And there are massive consequences for that. You need to be able to stand by everything you say about everyone. And that's like laying a foundation. How long they're on it, that we do need to monitor. You know, I'm sorry, at 8 o'clock, all phones down. And until recently, that was the rule. But again, teaching them personal responsibility because we're teaching them life skills. Like, you know, we need to know how to put them down. So we might need to, again, mirror what we're asking them to do. Make sense? Was there another one to that, or is that good? Yeah.
That becomes very difficult with the introduction of laptops at school and
Really hard.
doing homework.
Yeah.
And doing
Nightmare.
everything online.
Yeah.
So we've been in a situation where I know I've walked in, he's on the social media and he's flipped the
Yeah.
page over.
I know, they think we don't notice.
Yeah, but it's very, very difficult
Yeah.
to control, and you know, to me, it's an addiction.
It is. It is. And it's all the research is saying it's a massive addiction now.
And I'm not quite sure I understand anymore now that we've experienced it. The introduction, I think, of laptops into the schools has actually been quite detrimental
Yeah.
to the family environment.
It has. Yes, and a lot of research is showing that, and it is breaking down the family environment, which is why the importance of family time, where you actually say there are no devices allowed at particular times, is really important, because you need to teach them life skills that are about life outside that online world, because so much of their world will be online. I mean, so much more than our lives ever were. So we need to teach them boundaries, but they need to get them themselves. And so that's where, you know, while they're in your home, you know, maybe it's turning off the internet. And I know they can use their own data. But again, This is where I say it's really, you can't teach control. You can't do it from control. As parents, recognize that you've lost control completely, because they can go on Wi-Fi. If you take out their card, they can go on Wi-Fi at Westfield. So it's about teaching those boundaries and actually teaching them to understand why. And that just comes from talking it through and saying, well, what if? It's about philosophy. You sit there and go, well, what does it matter? Why does it matter? Let's talk about it. You convince me. Teach debating. You know, and you sit around and you are prepared to be educated and be wrong and be disagreed with, but actually you want to be heard. And so what you say is you have your ground rules that everyone will be heard and the way you're talking is respectful. But you teach, and it might be, we always have dinner on a Sunday evening together. And in fact, having set that up, and we went through a stage of not doing that at all, having set that up, we now have dinner together more nights than that. But Sunday night is the non-negotiable. Does that make sense? So because we're all talking, we're starting to have discussions like that, or we have them, and it means that they start thinking about their own use and their own responsibility. It's a really tough one, but the addiction does need to be acknowledged. But by saying to them, "Hey, I think you might be addicted to it," or you know, I'm finding it difficult to put down. Do you have that problem? So you make it a little less you're this, and say, I'm having a problem. I noticed that you're flipping between your homework and that. Do you find that easy? And afterwards, I'll talk to you about a way you can show them that switch tasking is really bad. Did you have a question?
Thank you, yes. My question, I guess it's kind of interrelated. It's about sleeping habits for teenagers.
Yes.
And I have a 17-year-old son. He's probably sleeping at the moment, actually.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. At school or at home?
No, it's at home. It's just exams.
Okay.
It's
yeah.
not like to school it because as they get older, 17, I mean, they can go up to 12, 1 in the morning.
Yeah.
Assignments, studying, etc.
They can.
Trying to get that balance. I'd be interested in your views.
Sleep is huge. I could have done a whole thing on sleep. Sleep is huge because, one, it's a coping mechanism. In every presentation of mental health, poor mental health, sleep is the number one thing that they try and put back together before they deal with the issues, because the lack of sleep messes up all the internal coping mechanisms. Their clock does change. They do have a later clock, but actually it isn't that much later than 10 o'clock. But what happens is there's so much stimulation that what they're watching, if they're online, it produces it produces adrenaline in their body. And so adrenaline is going through their veins as opposed to melatonin. Black and white books, fall asleep in bed reading, melatonin. That's what's produced by the body when you read black and white in bed. But there's so many devices, there's so much stimulation on television late at night that their brains haven't wound down. So what I do when I'm working with someone who has poor sleep habits, and pretty much everyone I work with, I always talk about what their bedtime routine is. I talk about a bedtime routine and ask them to have one, but I have to have one first. Like, I had to accept that in our house I was going to go to bed before my teenagers. And that was very difficult for me because, like, what are you going to do after I've gone to bed? But I had to figure out when I stopped eating sugar and when I stopped having caffeine at, any time after lunchtime, and when I cut sugar out of my diet, that made a massive difference. I was falling asleep on the sofa at 8:30, 9 o'clock anyway. So I said to them, how much do you suddenly want to start eating at 8 o'clock at night? Well, actually, you're probably not hungry, you're probably tired. What if we say no one can eat anything after 8 o'clock at night and see what happens to us all? What if the kitchen shuts, the cupboard doors shut? What happens? So I found that when I've looked at sleep, again, it's about empowering them, teaching them life skills. What would happen if you stopped eating? Where would you fall asleep and when would you fall asleep? And see what happened. The homework is hard, but actually that's organisational skills. So they kind of need to learn the organisational skills so that they haven't left it to the last minute, so they're not pulling an all-nighter. Makes sense. We need to finish. Okay, so I'm happy to stay and chat with anyone, but I know that you've all got to go back to work. So thank you very much.